Well, we're going to take a brief break now since we've all been on Zoom for a while and reconvene in 5 minutes for Kristen Stanford's presentation on managing your research collaboration. So we'll pause for just a moment and we'll see you back in a few minutes. Well, hello everyone, and welcome back to the program. I just put into the chat a lab manual from Scott Horsley Lab, and it's several pages long, but it's a good example just of one person's use of a lab manual that can give guidance to the participants in your lab on what how your lab works. So that's an example that you can use to work from. And I wanted to introduce to us, let me see what's going on. Is that any better? I'm not really sure what's going on. Let me turn it over to Kristen. I think we'll be able to understand her better.
Thanks, Stuart. Hi, everybody. I'm Kristen Stanford. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen here. I'm going to talk to you about collaborative research and kind of managing collaborations. And the point of this is to be interactive. So please stop me if you have questions. I'm going to talk about some kind of situations or thought-provoking ideas to get your feedback and kind of see if you have any questions based on some of these data. All right, so with regards to collaborative research, if you think of a past collaboration, think about what how did it develop? What were the outcomes of this collaboration? What assumptions did you make at the onset of this collaboration? And what do you wish you had done differently? And I think these are all really important points that we can talk about, and in terms of what how we proceed in collaborations and what we would like to do in the future. I'm sorry, I'm trying to make it so I can see the chat box as well, but I can't seem to do that. So related to your current research, when we talk about collaborations, I think one of the things that's really important to think about as you are getting ready to formulate a collaboration is how might a collaborator accelerate your current research? Where would you look to find that person? And then what results from a successful collaboration? The way that science is moving right now is everything is really towards team science. And I think that the stronger you can make your collaborative team, the better that is received in terms of grant funding and grant applications and manuscript co-authors. I know Jill mentioned a little bit earlier about shared senior author publications. And I think those have really grown in the past 10 years and highlighting how each lab can contribute, their expertise to a particular collaboration or study. Again, results from a successful collaboration can include manuscripts, grant proposals, program project grants, training grants, and really any other synergistic type of grants, new courses or new conferences that develop from these types of ideas. And so what I want to do now is talk about a couple scenarios in various collaborations. And I can't seem to see the chat box on here, so just interrupt me or give me some feedback with these. So if you've got a postdoc who's working on a project for her somewhat junior PI that is a collaboration with a very successful PI in a strong department at another institution, there are many hours spent on a project that results in postdoc one listed as a third author on 2 publications because her PI is afraid to rock the boat with a more powerful or successful collaborator. So what would be some things that you would do in this situation or would want to do in this situation, or other ways that you could essentially avoid this situation? So how could you protect the postdoc? What would be some things that you would want to do to help that? Let's do it this way. Any thoughts?
Ideally, authorship is discussed up front.
So I think that's a great, yeah, sorry, I see it in the chat box now. Yeah, I think that's a great point. So I think, one of the things that from my perspective is the most important is communication and discussing expectations beforehand, discussing authorship beforehand, trying to figure out, where everybody is so that they're all in the same boat. Did the hours spent on that project that they're listed as third author, did they contribute more hours, or was it still, similar to the authors who were the first two authors in that situation? And I think you're right. I think discussing the expectations beforehand, there are things, and I think Jill mentioned this a little bit earlier too, about authorship agreements, or discussing authorship in her lab handout. There are authorship agreements that you can bring into with collaborators, and I think those are all really important to discuss beforehand or as you're proceeding with a project. Another scenario in this, which can affect different collaborations, are if you're a junior PI and you serendipitously stumble upon a finding and start to work on that area that is closely related to an area that a senior PI in your department is working on. Junior PI keeps it a secret and publishes a brief communication without consulting the senior PI. And I guess my thoughts on that or my question to you on that is, did the junior PI do anything wrong in that situation?
Yes.
Okay, so why did they do something wrong?
So when it comes to senior authorship, I've been taught that, and I'm a junior, let me preface this by saying I'm a junior faculty member myself, but I've been taught that the data, who the data belongs to is the senior, typically a senior author when it comes to publication. And so if this particular publication emerged from the data that belong to the senior PI, the junior PI ethically should share any publications coming from that data.
Yeah, so I think that's an important point. If it depends on whose lab the data was collected in, right? So if the data was, if the junior PI was working on this kind of on their own, and found this data in their own lab and was not, in communication or working with or supported by the senior PI, then does that change things a little bit in terms of who the data belongs to? Or if they did it, within the senior PI's lab, then I think that changes things pretty gravely. If perhaps this was something that was just the junior PI was working on their own, and they did not, they didn't do it in collaboration initially with the senior PI, and they published a brief communication without consulting a senior PI, then what are your thoughts on that?
It's all good.
I think, yeah. So I mean, I think ethically that's probably fine, but and I don't think that they are required to talk to a senior PI. I think this gets into department politics a little bit, and whether your future work or your future grant submissions are going to be affected by that. And I think those are all just kind of things to consider as you go along. I mean, I agree with you. I don't think that they needed to consult with the senior PI, but it might help them in the long run to use that PI as a consultant on something in the future if they're going to submit a grant on that. Any other thoughts?
I think intent is important because you don't want to burn a bridge to someone that has done a lot for you as a junior PI. And just knowing that that's a valuable relationship, and trust is important.
I think you cut out at the end. Yeah, and I think you're right. I think these are meant to be thought-provoking issues, and it's one of those things where I don't think you could argue in either way, that they could have kept it to themselves or that they could have consulted with a senior PI. I think the burning bridges thing is an important aspect to consider as a junior PI. I don't think you did anything wrong, or that person did anything wrong either way, but I think, you know, again, communication, I think is important. I think you want the support of a senior person in the lab, and it's possible that the junior PI, you know, went to them before and that person was not helpful or was not able to, didn't like that they were working in a similar area. And I think those are all reasonable things that could have happened kind of on the opposite end. Any other thoughts or comments? All right, so moving on to the next one. So if you have a junior faculty member who's struggling for funding in an adverse climate and agrees to serve as a co-PI on an R01 with a senior faculty member and get about 20% salary support. Before the R01 is funded, the junior faculty member gets a career development award and can no longer receive salary support from other NIH grants. Does she honor her commitment, or how does she compromise? Any thoughts on this?
I think this goes to relationship building. Hopefully your senior faculty member will have been a mentor to you in some way, and will be able to discuss with you which would be best for your career growth. If it's the development grant, you know, allowing you to remove yourself from the grant, I think would be very reasonable for someone who's a senior, and replace you.
Yeah. Could there be some other options within that as well? You know, like one thing I think about is, could you, I think you're right. I think, you know, I think you need to do what's best for your career. But could you sway that money to, instead of salary support, to be supply money for you to be able to use, you know, to use that to complete some of these experiments within your lab? Could you use it to support a percentage of a student or a postdoc or research staff? That could also, then they could help complete those experiments. What are, you know, and I think this all goes back to communication. Can you guys open line of communications and make sure that everybody's on the same page, and so you can both benefit from these? Because I think collaborative relationships are, you know, I'm going to steal this from Lauren Wall, but he likes to say that they're symbiotic, and so, you know, both people are contributing to the growth of this relationship in kind of equal amounts and not parasitic. So you got both parties that are growing together in this sense. And I think this is a great example of a situation where, you know, communication here, could you do what's best for you, and take your career development grant, and then still, you know, flip some of that, maybe that monetary support to a different way, so you would still benefit from it, because you likely put in effort, you know, to getting this grant funded and to developing some of the preliminary data on it. All right, so scenario number 4, a postdoc is recruited to a lab where research is centered on the cell biology of a specific mammalian cell type. The postdoc brings a technique to the lab that can be used in a project assigned to a graduate student. The postdoc completely trains a senior level graduate student working in the group. Several months later, a manuscript describing this work is prepared for submission, and the postdoc is only listed in the acknowledgement section of the paper. Does the postdoc have a case for authorship? So I think this goes back to communication again. I've seen both sides of this. When I was a postdoc, I had a colleague who had optimized the use of an IBIS machine, and he had worked with another postdoc optimizing things in this experiment with this particular mouse line for hours on this. And the day that the other postdoc went to run an experiment that was going to be using the manuscript, he didn't include the postdoc who had, you know, optimized all of these things. So technically, you know, they didn't contribute to any data that was directly used in the paper, but ethically, could they have run the experiment without their colleague who optimized everything? I don't think so, but they were listed in the acknowledgements. So again, I think, you know, this is a great thing to have a conversation about upfront. Putting in authorship guidelines and what you expect out of a relationship. You know, in this case, was the postdoc told that they were going to train the graduate student in this technique, and that they would not be, you know, an author on this project. They were being asked to train them so that they could complete the experiments on their own. Did it take the postdoc, you know, 1,000 hours to train the grad student, or did they pick it up in an afternoon? I think those are all things that are really important with regards to collaborations. You know, I think authorship, if warranted, is a really easy thing to get. You know, we include if undergrads in our lab contribute to a project, they're included as authors if they've contributed to the data collection that's used in the graphs. I think that's a pretty straightforward thing to do. But I think, again, it's an upfront conversation. It's an authorship agreement. It's making sure everybody's on the same page as you begin some of these lines of investigation. Does anybody have any thoughts on that or questions on that?
I don't think there's really enough information just in this scenario as you've written it to really make a decision. Like if the technique was something that was maybe difficult but freely available for people to find on a Jove article or something like that, you know, maybe there's less of an argument. If the postdoc brought it to the lab, but it was truly their unique process, then maybe there's more of an argument. If they brought it and then were never involved again, or if they were helping to drive the research questions, I think there's a lot of different ways that this postdoc could have been involved.
I think it's a great point. Yeah, I mean, we don't know enough about to know if the postdoc was training them just because they'd done it before, or trained them because it was their specific expertise. Did they develop the technique? I mean, we don't know that. And I think that's part of the point, is that, you know, what are the things that kind of lean into that decision or to that kind of communication? You know, we've also had situations where we've been trained in different techniques in my lab, and the person who trained us, you know, maybe we included them as an author on the first manuscript, but not on the second when they didn't contribute to it. And like, where's the line of appropriateness there? And I think it's a gray area. I think, you know, this is an important idea where you can make sure you're, again, communicating with your colleagues, with the PI from a different lab if it's their postdoc, and making sure everybody's on the same page and understands what the boundaries are for that. Any other thoughts or comments or questions on these?
Just a quick question, and maybe this is something you discuss, is just if you are in that junior role, how do you strategically navigate kind of that power structure when having these open communications?
Yeah, so it's always a tricky line to figure out how to do that. I think the best way to do it is to be as upfront as you can be from the get-go. You know, you're going to be in situations where this is your idea and this is what you want to do, and you're anticipating this being your senior author paper, but, you know, perhaps you don't have the manpower to do it, or you only have half the skill set. And I think, you know, I think that's a great opportunity for a co-senior author paper. We've had a couple of those in my lab where we brought one distinct skill set, but we couldn't do the other part of it by ourselves. And so right up front, we said, you know, this is going to be a co-first and co-senior author manuscript. Here's how we're going to break it down and make it a really true collaborative manuscript. Now, the flip of that is that I've also had situations where I felt that my lab did like 90% of the work. And at the end of it, you know, another PI came to me and said I should be co-senior author on this paper, and I was junior to them, and we had to have a long conversation about this, because it was literally breaking things down by figures. You know, how much of the actual data collection contributes to authorship, how much of the initial idea contributes to authorship, and kind of working our ways through that. And those are difficult conversations. The university has pretty distinct guidelines on authorship, and I think Stuart might have put one of those things in the chat box at some point on authorship, or an authorship handbook. And it gets, you know, even to step back one further, does the idea for the manuscript, does that gain you authorship on it if you didn't really contribute much intellectually beyond that? Or, you know, did you say like, oh, you should do this experiment, and then I didn't actually do the experiment for you, you did it yourself? Does that give me some intellectual input into that? And I think those are all really gray areas. And I think as junior faculty, especially, you know, you need to be in a situation where you can protect yourself and make sure that you are benefiting, but also, you know, having open lines of communication so that you can do some of these things successfully, and being able to do stuff that perhaps your lab couldn't do on your own, or that you wouldn't be able to do right as you're getting started out. Any other comments or questions on this? So, one of the things that we talk about a lot is why collaborate. And I think there are more reasons than not to collaborate. I think it promotes your productivity, it gives you higher impact factors for publications, it gives you more publications, makes your grant applications more innovative and more competitive. We're collaborating with an engineer right now who's, every time I put in my innovation section in a grant with something that they do, everybody's in my field is completely blown away because it's not something we typically do. And that has really, helped us. And we've been able to include them as co-authors on our manuscripts and vice versa. And really, in my opinion, grow the science a lot through different aspects of communication. Also diversification of funding so you can survive periods of low funding rates. There are several foundation grants that are out there that have specific kind of niche things that you can do, and maybe you can do one part of it, but speaking to a collaborator, you can kind of take some of their techniques and apply them to your question or vice versa, and that can make you eligible for different foundation grants, which I think can be really impactful. Bottom line for effective communications, and I know I've said this today, and this is really kind of the theme, is communication from beginning to end. I think most collaborations, if there is a failure or a blip in them, it's usually from communication. And this can be from communication between you and the other PI, between you and the postdoc or grad student from the other lab, or from the PI to the grad student or postdoc in your lab. And I think, setting up from the beginning, are you guys going to meet and talk about this once a week? Or just the two of you going to meet and talk about this once a week? Or is everybody in your lab who's involved in this project going to be involved in this conversation once a week? Right now, my lab communicates via text message with other labs a lot, which I don't have a problem with, except that things get lost in communication. So, I got brought into something within about 2 weeks later where they'd been communicating with the grad student from another lab via text. And so we had no records of it, and they were changing experiment times and trying to match everybody's schedule. And it became this really huge problem because we couldn't follow the half the conversations were run via email and half were on text message. So I think establishing how you want to communicate with the other lab, how you want to communicate within your lab and within other labs are really important. Establishing individual roles and expectations at the onset. This goes from everything from the grant application to a publication to authorship. If this is going to be a part of a grad student's thesis, if a postdoc is going to take this and spin this into their own project and grant. A lot of collaborations. Let me say this a different way. A lot of postdocs, when they try to apply for their own funding and are looking to write a K grant, they need to take the expertise that they've learned and also apply, a different expertise for how they're going to spin it a little bit differently. And very often that comes from a collaborative lab who does something different than you do, or they've reached out to a different PI to kind of branch the science in a different way. Making sure that everybody's on the same page with those applications, I think, is really important, because you don't want anyone to feel like they're being slighted, and you also want the science to grow and for the relationships to grow. Identify a data retention plan, making sure you know where all the data is going to be stored. So 2 years later, you're not trying to track down an undergrad or a grad student who has massive files that you've not been able to find. I know Buckeye Box is being redistributed now, but a shared Dropbox, we've done that with other labs before, or more secure databases if it's human data. Agreeing on reagent distribution. This can be from mice to chemical, making sure that everybody has access to the same things, and you can figure out where things are and who's being able to do which experiments, and optimizing some of these things. As I mentioned, discussing authorship at the onset and throughout. But one important part of that is to be realistic about your contribution. If you've got either you or someone in your lab has contributed to the project, I think authorship is obviously warranted, but making sure it's realistic in terms of what you've done and what you've contributed to the project and what you intend to do and contribute to the project. Very often we work with one lab really closely, and we've set some things where we know we're working on a project that's going to be big, and we've said we're going to be co-senior author on both of these manuscripts, but my lab's driving this one and your lab's driving this one. And I think very often, the data splits out in a sense where that is able to be done. It's not to say that they're both going to be at the same impact. But I think, doing things that way allow you to take a little bit more ownership of what you're working on. and allow again the science to grow and allow your lab to feel their own ownership, but also contribute to the other project and kind of vice versa. Discussing intellectual properties issues at the onset. This is a really important aspect if you have either new technology or really any type of IP. When you submit for a patent through Ohio State, everyone who's listed as an inventor is split evenly on the application. And if you don't want that to happen, you need to be very clear from the get-go before the patent actually gets filed. Also establishing who's in charge and who will be responsible. This is important, especially it's important for projects, it's important for grant applications, it's important for manuscripts. Even if you are co-senior author or if it's an MPI grant application, there's typically a lead contact, and making sure that person, knows what they're doing, knows that they're trying to orchestrate the whole event, and kind of helping everybody within communication on those lines. Does anybody have any questions or comments on these things? So one of the things that's I think is really important is to talk about some of the issues involved in collaborations. And again, you always hope that when you start working with somebody that it's just going to be this beautiful relationship, and you're going to grow your science, and then it will either continue to grow, or you guys will both come to a logical end, and that just doesn't always happen. And so I think some of the things that are really important with this are what are the scientific issues, goals, and anticipated outcomes. And within that, I guess what I mean by that is, are you just collaborating to get a paper out? Or do you have bigger visions? Do you have visions of submitting an MPI grant together? Do you have visions of submitting a PPG together? Do you think this is going to turn into a T32 application? And I think those things can be, you don't always know them at the onset, but I think being able to communicate within those things, especially from the beginning, are really important. And again, those things can change as you're moving along and you see, oh, this logically is going to flip into a grant application, or you know what, we're going to get this paper out and we're going to switch directions on this, and I'll keep working on this aspect and you can keep working on this aspect, or we can, kind of both go our separate ways. Kind of along those lines, when is the project over? Is the project over when a grant is submitted? Is the project over when a manuscript comes out? Is it over when a graduate student defends their thesis? This can change. Again, this can ebb and flow throughout the span of a project, or easy things to talk about. And again, the conversation can keep flowing and changing as time goes. As development team agrees these issues, some people get really invested in a project, and you may think this is a good idea, and you may get over it and want your lab to go in a different direction. I think those are all fair things to say. Just making sure that everybody's aware of them. We had an example where we had a grant, an MPI grant, and it didn't get discussed twice, and my collaborator wanted to go back in, and I finally got to the point where I was like, we're done. This is not successful. We've not been successful twice. We can't get this grant discussed. We need to either start over or take a really different approach. And they did not like that response. They wanted, they really thought we could, keep tweaking it a little bit and making sure things balanced out and try to get it funded again. And so we ended up kind of splitting the project in that sense, because we just didn't agree on where things were going. I think those are important things to discuss. And again, keeping those lines of communication as you go along, so that everybody is on the same page, or at least knows where you're going to go. I mean, in that sense, we were just done. So we stepped away, and they, took their own angle on it. What are the expected contributions of each participant? If you have different areas in terms of the biology of things, or in terms of the scientific input to things, how these things are going and how each lab is contributing to them are really important to discuss. For example, we work, my lab is more focused on metabolism, and we've collaborated with some neuroscience researchers. And we do the metabolic testing. That's our role in it. We don't do anything that has to do with the brain. We let them do that. So making sure that we're all on the same page with, like, this aspect of it is going to be done by my lab. This aspect is going to be done by your lab. We'll try to fit these together. And if they fit together in a manner that we can put together a big manuscript and make it a joint publication, we can. If it's 90% metabolism, then it'll come out of my lab. If it's 90% neuro, it'll come out of your lab. I think those are fair things to talk about up front. This also goes into grant applications. This is really important with students. If students feel like they've committed more or completed more or less of a project, where should those things lie? Are you going to allow a collaborator to use data generated by your student in a grant application? Is the student okay with that? How is that going to be discussed among the two PIs and among the students? And then finally, who will write progress reports and final reports? So typically, with even a shared grant, there's a lead contact person. This is the same way for even co-senior author manuscripts. There's a lead contact, and that person is typically required to write the report, progress reports, the final reports, to edit the final version of the manuscript. But communicating very clearly with your co-Is, and you're making sure that they're on the same page and they understand what you expect from them when you're going to get some of these details back, with the deadlines on for progress reports and for final reports. These are really, really essential things, I think, to communicate as things are going on. Any comments or questions about any of these things? Crystal clear. Some other issues that come up within collaborations. How will you decide about redirecting the research agenda? If you are, again, like I mentioned, we've got metabolism and neurofocus. If the data seems to really be lending toward the metabolism aspect, do we need to redirect the research in terms of that avenue? Similar in the opposite direction, if this is taking on a very neuro approach or a neuro theme, that's less of my expertise. So do I need to back out, and you need to take a bigger role here to try to figure out what the problem is and to redirect the research a little bit. How will you ensure that all appropriate members are kept fully informed? Again, this is communication, right? So are you guys all, I know some labs that have a Slack group where they are all able to talk on a pretty frequent basis on that. Is this by emails, or are they group emails? Is every member of the collaboration CC'd on every email you're sending forth? Are you updating a Dropbox file that has data in it, and that's going to allow you to kind of keep things going and moving forward in a meaningful direction? How will you negotiate the development of new collaborations or new projects? Are you bringing someone else in as a collaborator? Did you think that maybe you could add this person on this aspect of it? Then is it a 3-person collaboration, or is it kind of a 2 on one side and 1 on the other? What if it's something that stems off of this collaboration that really is focused on what your lab works on? How are you gonna kind of shift that direction? Or what if the opposite's true? What if you find something that you don't know how to study, and you need to kind of pass it off to your collaborator, but you still want to stay involved in that? I think these are all really important things to discuss, and they affect authorship and grant submissions down the line. But again, the more effectively you can discuss them early onset, I think the more successful you will be. And how and by whom will personnel be supervised? So for a lot of grant applications, you can say you're going to split a grad student or split a postdoc. If you've got a project, a lot of times these working on a manuscript, a postdoc can be learning a new technique in your lab. Someone else's postdoc can be learning something in your lab, but who then are they responsible to responding to, and how are you going to make sure that that they're balanced and that they're able to kind of respond to both people, or keep everybody happy, or at least on the same page. Again, these are other lines of communication. I don't think they're always easy. I think talking about it and having written documentation of what you think they should be doing are important, but I think these are all, they go into each individual relationship and how that's going to work out. Any comments or questions on this slide? So another set of issues with collaborations, and I think we've touched on this a little bit so far, what's the criteria and process for assigning authorship and credits? How will credit be attributed to each collaborator's institution for public presentations, abstracts, and written articles? How and whom will public presentations be made? How and by whom will media inquiries be handled? These are really easy ways to frustrate collaborators. You might get asked to give a presentation at a national conference, and you want to include some of this data in what they're presenting, and they might not want you to because they want to take ownership of it. Vice versa, they might be asked to do something and you don't want them to present data from your lab because you want to present it at a later date. You know, with media inquiries, if a press release is coming out, they're going to ask you questions. They might reach out to your collaborator as well. You can always direct them to your collaborator, but they, you know, it depends on kind of how the release is being written. And I think these things are really important and not necessarily things that we think about all the time as a project is developing. And it's important because you want to be upfront with your colleagues and your collaborators, and you want to make sure everybody is okay with who's getting the attention and the credit. And they often aren't. I mean, it's, you know, like if you're interviewing the quarterback instead of the offensive line, right? The quarterback maybe made the play, but they couldn't have done it without the offensive line. And that kind of works in this this manner as well. And so I think it's really important to be upfront about some of these things, and just make sure everybody's on the same page or is aware of what's being released, they've approved of your presentation. One thing I like to do is show a picture of them, not just a name in the acknowledgement slide, but as, you know, as the grad student or the postdoc working on the project, or the collaborator, the other PI we've worked with, showing their picture across a slide to make sure it's very clear that, like, this is what they did. We could not have done that without them. If it's a media inquiry, making sure everybody has seen the press release and has signed off on it and has had some input in it. And I think those things may not be the perfect way to handle it, but at least kind of keep everybody on the same page. Any comments or questions? So I think this is my last issues of collaboration slide, but, you know, when and how will you handle IP and patent applications? How and by whom will the data be managed? And should one of the principals of your research team move to another institution, how will you handle data, specimens, lab books, authorship, and credit? And, you know, a lot of these things, if you submit an MPI grant to the NIH, have to be addressed in your MPI leadership plan. And I think those are great, the way that they're written out in principle, but I think these are important conversations to have up front. You know, if this is IP, how are you going to, who's going to submit it? Who's going to be the lead inventor on it? Did you all, as I mentioned before, contribute equally to this process? Or is somebody, you know, was it really 70-30 and somebody else is you know, deserves credit for the IP, but maybe not to the same extent? That all has to be established right from the get-go. In terms of data management, is it going to be stored on a shared drive? Does everybody have access to that shared drive? Is it in Dropbox? Is it on a more secure file system? Who has access to it? What happens in 10 years to that data if somebody goes back to find it? And again, if one of you leave, you know, say you have a grant where you're working on a similar mouse model, or you're working on a shared mouse, and one of you is working on, let's say, the periphery and one's working on the brain. If you leave, then does the mouse stay at Ohio State, or does it go with you? How do you figure that out? These are really important conversations to have up front. I don't think there's a great answer to any of them right off the bat, besides saying that you need to talk about it and make sure that everybody is okay with what the resolve will be. Any questions or comments on this?
There's a good comment in the chat. Great thoughts, but how can you speak about how you manage all of these needs without also delaying progress?
Yeah, that's a great point. It's really hard. There's not, I think for a lot of this stuff, there's not really an easy answer to it. And, you know, it sounds cheesy and cliche to say, but communication is really the only thing that can kind of help you move some of this stuff forward, or being really upfront. You know, if you're going to talk about, you know, if someone's going to move and looking for a new faculty position, they're probably not telling all their colleagues or collaborators right up front. So you're going to hit a blip there. I think with data management, I think that's something that can be said at the onset of collaboration, you know, and you can make sure that the people who need to have access to it. We had a situation where we had, in a collaborative lab, we had an undergrad who had done a bunch of experiments for us, and they left unannounced, and it took us 6 months to find all the data. And it's, you know, that could have been really easily avoided. And, you know, in the future, we'll make sure we have that data up front. We'll make sure that multiple people have it in different copies, and we can easily track everything back and forth. How you manage these without delaying the process is really just talking and staying on top of it. You know, I think one of the things that happens very often is with collaborations as you're moving along in a project, you might be moving along, I don't want to say slowly, but it's just kind of at an average pace. And so some of these things can kind of go unnoticed or unannounced until you get to a point where you really need, to get the data together for a grant application or something like that. And I think being more on top of it and being able to have these conversations more frequently help everybody along. If you need to meet with another lab once a month, just to make sure everybody's on the same page, that's not overly intrusive, but can sometimes help keep everything kind of balanced.
I did put in the chat the document why you need a research prenup, which has kind of a framework how you could write out some of these things in advance. And of course, the conflicts that could resolve from these issues could delay progress much more than just talking about it in advance and getting settled.
Yeah. No, absolutely. And I think, I think part of the thing with some of these things is they're unanticipated, right? You don't, while you might hope that IP is going to come out of a project, you don't know that at the onset. And then if something happens, not everybody's necessarily going to feel like it was always a 50-50 contribution. And so making sure that, you're able to show what you did and how you contributed to this versus what they did and how they contributed to this, I think they're important. And those aren't always easy conversations to have. So making sure you've got everything documented and have, been maintaining this line of communication always helps. So this gets to people issues in research collaborations. And this can kind of span from a bunch of different things. Are the researchers well suited for the collaboration? Do they have appropriate experience and training? Do they have a proven track record of accomplishments? Does the collaboration bring together individuals with complementary and integrated expertise? Are the different leadership styles compatible? How will reviewers view this role? How does my collaborator view my qualifications? And are both collaborators equal? And I think kind of the overwhelming theme of this is this last one, and that is, are both collaborators equal? So, if you are the junior PI in a collaboration, I think these are really important conversations to have up front to say, like, this is what my lab is going to do. Make it very clear that you see yourself on equal footing as them. I think, the leadership styles comment is very important. I manage my graduate students and postdocs differently than some of my colleagues. My lab is they're usually at work between 8 and 9, and we collaborated with a lab who their postdoc didn't get to work until 1. And that was a problem. And, that lab wasn't necessarily enforcing what, that they needed to come in earlier, and they were delaying some of our experiments. And we had to have a couple difficult conversations to figure out how we could make this work successfully. I think one thing that is really important, especially if you are a junior PI, is determining, do the participants have appropriate experience and training and have a proven track record of accomplishments? I think there are great opportunities to submit MPI grants, but if you are both very junior and have not established yourselves as such, it's not always seen in the best light. So is your collaborators, the collaborator you've chosen, do they have the expertise required to advance these projects? And are they going to be able to help you advance your career, and vice versa? Are you going to be able to have enough experience to move things along in a positive manner? And are you guys going to be able to be successful when you submit a grant application? Or are they going to say these are two junior people, neither one of them has the track record for publications necessary for this type of funding mechanism? And I think those are important things to consider as you collaborate with people. How do you need a balance? And there are some grant mechanisms that focus on this specifically, where, like the American Heart Association Collaborative Sciences Award, where they require the PIs to be at different training levels, one more junior and one more senior, to kind of help, within that balance of things. Any comments or questions on that? Somebody just add something to the chat about data ownership. Yeah, and that's very true. OSU owns your research data, and there are some interesting policies on that in terms of what data can be used within collaborations within OSU. Oh, okay. I can be done, or let me show my last slide. So I just want to end with this. I think it's 11:30 now, but collaborations are a lot like personal relationships. They might last 1 or 2 dates, they might last for decades, and they might end in divorce. And I think knowing when that happens is a really important thing in terms of general collaborations, because I think you know, I think you want to make sure that you've protected yourself and that you are advancing your career and contributing to the greater good of science. And so I think knowing how these collaborations work, knowing if they're continuing in a symbiotic manner, if there needs to be a clean break, is a really important thing. And again, they're not always easy conversations to have, but I think they're really important and can help you move your science forward and help your careers along. I'm happy to answer any questions. I can stay on and answer them now, or I can answer them by email later. Just let me know what works for you guys.
Yeah, thank you, Kristen, for that informative presentation. I hope you all found that helpful. Are there any final questions or comments? Well, I thank you all for attending today, and I do hope that you found the information, some of the resources I posted for you in the chat, which will also be emailing out to you, will be helpful for you in managing your research. And also, you should be receiving probably tomorrow an evaluation of this session. We appreciate if you could take just a few moments to respond to that evaluation. The feedback helps me and the staff at CCTS make sure we're providing quality programming to the OSU community. So thank you, everyone, and hope you enjoy the rest of your day.